Picture a bucket. An ordinary wooden bucket, the kind you'd use to carry water or slop out a stable. Now fill it with everything that came out of a family of 6 over the course of one night. Their chamber pots, their scraps, whatever they coughed up, spat out, or scraped off their plates. Now imagine it's 2 a.m, and you're standing at an upstairs window with that bucket, and you're about to throw it into the street. And here's the thing. There are rules about this. Official rules. Civic rules. Rules that have been argued over in council chambers and written into law and enforced by actual men with actual authority. Rules about exactly when you may throw your waste into the street, and from what height, and with what warning. Not rules about whether you can do it. You absolutely can. You absolutely will. Everyone does. Just rules about when. That's the 1660s for you. Welcome to London, the greatest city in the world. Population 500,000 and growing. Centre of global trade. Seat of a monarchy freshly restored after a decade of Puritan misery. Home to scholars and philosophers and the newly founded Royal Society, where some of the best minds in Europe are meeting regularly to think great thoughts about the nature of the universe. A place where you can hear a sermon in the morning, watch a theatre performance in the afternoon, buy spices from 3 different continents before supper, and then step directly into someone else's bodily waste on the way home. A place where Isaac Newton's colleagues are debating the laws of planetary motion, and the street outside their building smells like the inside of a very old and very full outhouse. A place where the rules say you must cry Gardy-loo before emptying your chamber pot from the window, warning the people below, common courtesy, except almost nobody does it, and even when they do, there isn't always anywhere to step. So, I make these history stories, and I genuinely have no idea if you're listening to fall asleep, or if you're one of those people who actually likes hearing about centuries of accumulated human filth, and the increasingly creative ways that people tried to pretend it wasn't a problem. Either way, I'm glad you're here. Get comfortable. Pull something over you. Make sure the room is dark. Here we go. The first thing you need to understand is that the smell hits you before the city does. You're coming in from the countryside, maybe Kent, maybe Essex, somewhere with open fields and cold mornings and the honest smell of earth and manure, animal manure, the kind you grew up with, the kind that's just part of farming and doesn't bother you. You're riding in the back of a wagon. It's October of 1663. The air is cold and sharp, and the fields are going brown at the edges. The road is muddy from last night's rain, and the wagon wheels are throwing up a fine spray of grit and cold water. You left before dawn. You've been travelling for hours. Your back aches from the wooden boards. Your hands are numb. And then, maybe an hour outside the city, something changes. This smell arrives before anything else you can see or hear. It comes on a shift in the wind, a wave of something thick and brown and complex that hits the back of your throat and sits there. It's not one smell, it's dozens, layered on top of each other like badly stacked laundry. The sharp bite of coal smoke, because every house in the city burns coal now, not wood. And the difference between coal smoke and wood smoke is the difference between something almost pleasant and something that sticks to the inside of your nose like soot-flavoured paste. Underneath that, something organic and warm despite the cold air, the collective exhalation of 500,000 bodies, the smell of people simply living, compressed into a space that wasn't designed to hold them. And underneath that, the thing you will learn to recognise as the baseline condition of 1660s London, the foundation note, the thing that never goes away, Not in summer or winter, not in rain or dry weather, not ever. Human waste, animal waste, the combined output of everything alive in the city, sitting in streets and gutters and cesspits, and the slow-moving brown river that runs through the heart of it all. You'll never get used to it. That's what everyone says. You'll get used to it, but you won't. Not fully. You just stop noticing it every minute and start noticing it only every few minutes. That's the closest you'll get. The wagon driver hasn't looked up from his horses. He's made this run 100 times. For him, the smell is just the signal that he's almost home. For you, it's the signal that everything is about to change. Your name is Thomas Aldgate. You're 17 years old, which in this city makes you somewhere between a boy and a man, which means people will expect a man's work from you and give you a boy's authority. You've got a letter in your coat pocket, a letter of introduction, written by the rector of your village church, addressed to a man named Edmund Farrow, a tallow chandler on East Cheap, near Gracechurch Street. Mr. Farrow is your mother's cousin's husband, a connection thin enough to snap in a strong wind, but enough to get you through the door. You've been told he needs a boy to help with deliveries and errands. You've been told he's a fair man. You've been told London will make you or break you, and you've chosen to believe the first half of that. The wagon drops you at London Bridge. You climb down, legs stiff, and stand there with your bundle of clothes and your letter of introduction, and 3 shillings and 4pence, everything you own in the world. And then the full force of the city hits you. Not just the smell, which you've been registering for the past mile without quite believing it. The noise, the density, the sheer volume of people. More people in one street than in your entire village. And everyone moving, everyone talking, everyone with somewhere to be and something to carry. And no particular interest in the 17-year-old boy from the country standing there with his mouth open. A cart nearly knocks you sideways. The carter shouts something you don't fully catch, something with a curse in the middle of it, and the horse, a massive grey beast with wild eyes, passes close enough that you can smell its sweat. You step backward and step directly into something. You look down. Your boot has found one of London's open gutters. The gutter runs down the centre of the street, a channel maybe 8 inches wide and 6 inches deep, and it's full. Not full of water, full of everything the street has produced since the last rain, which was yesterday, which means it's had time to settle, but not time to disperse. And what you've stepped into is thick and brown and has, you will notice in a moment, a warmth to it that the October air absolutely does not. Your first 30 seconds in London, and already the city has left its mark on you. A woman passing by doesn't even glance at you. This is not remarkable to her. This is just what happens when you stand still too long. You lift your boot out with a sucking sound and look around for somewhere to wipe it. There is nowhere to wipe it. Welcome to London, Thomas. This is how everyone arrives. Edmund Farrow's shop is on Eastcheap, which even in 1663 is one of the older streets in this part of the city. A butcher's street historically, though the butchers have spread and been joined by chandlers and grocers and all manner of other trades. The name itself comes from the Old English for cheap, which just means market. Everything around here is a market. You find it by asking 3 different people for directions and getting 3 different answers and then following your nose. Not in a metaphorical sense. The smell of a tallow chandler is specific. Tallow is rendered animal fat, the fat of cattle and sheep, melted down and clarified and poured into moulds to make candles. and the process of making it smell like what it is, which is boiling animal fat, which is one of those smells that once you know it, you cannot mistake it for anything else. You follow the smell to a shop front with a hanging sign, a candle, obviously, and step through the low door. The interior is dim and warm. Candles in various stages of completion hang from wooden frames along the ceiling. The air is hazy with fat smoke. The floor is wooden and slightly sticky, and you realise after a moment that the stickiness is not grime but tallow that has dripped from the moulds and hardened into a waxy film on the boards. A man appears from the back room. He's maybe 45, built wide across the shoulders from years of lifting and stirring great vats of rendered fat. His hands look like they've been dipped in wax and never properly cleaned. His apron was white once, probably. He reads the rector's letter without expression, reads it again, puts it in his pocket. You know what work we do here? Candles, sir. Candles? And the making of candles. Do you know what candles are made of? Tallow, sir. Tallow. He looks at you. Do you know what tallow is made of? You know, but you sense this is a test of something other than knowledge. Animal fat, sir. Animal fat. A pause. And do you know where the animal fat comes from? The butcher's, sir. He almost smiles. The butcher's waste. The parts they can't sell. The parts nobody wants. The fat and the sinew and the trimmings and the blood cakes. Everything the butchers can't put on a table, we buy and we render down and we make into light. That's what we do. We take what everyone else throws away and we make it into something useful. A pause. You understand? Yes, sir. Good. He looks at you one more time. You'll smell like this within a week. You won't notice after a month. Don't let it bother you. This is the most personal thing Edmund Farrow will say to you for several weeks. Your room is at the top of the house. There's a boy called John already up there. He'll show you what's what. Be downstairs before the bells ring 7, and... He glances at your boot. Find a puddle on the way up. Clean that off. He disappears into the back room. You stand there for a moment with your bundle and your letter gone, and your boot still carrying the gutter's greeting. Your new life in London has officially begun. Here is the thing about London in 1663 that nobody told you when they said go to London, make your fortune. London is, in many respects, two cities living inside each other. There is the London that the engravings show, the steeples, the river, the grand buildings, the busy commerce, the sense of possibility, of energy, of a place at the centre of the world. That London is real. You will see it and feel it, and it will take your breath away sometimes on clear mornings when the light hits St. Paul's just right, and the river is silver and the whole city seems to float. And then there is the London underneath that, the London of the streets and the gutters and the cesspits and the wells and the complicated, fragile, frequently failing systems that are supposed to keep the city from killing all the people who live in it. That London is also real, and that London has rules. Not the kind of rules that are posted on walls, though some of them actually are. Proclamations from the Lord Mayor, notices from the various parish vestries, orders from the Court of Aldermen. Not the kind of rules that are enforced with any particular consistency, though they are enforced sometimes, enough to give you pause, but rules nonetheless. A whole system of rules about human waste and animal waste and water and garbage and dead things and the distance between a slaughterhouse and a market, and whether you may throw your pot of night soil into the street at noon versus at midnight. Rules that will govern your life in this city in ways you haven't yet begun to understand. John, The other apprentice, skinny and 16 and from somewhere in Lincolnshire with the accent so thick you have to ask him to repeat himself twice before you catch most of what he says. John explains them to you on your first night. You're lying on the straw mattress in the attic room. The ceiling is low enough that you could touch it if you sat up straight. The room smells of tallow and something older, something absorbed into the wood over decades. John has a candle. Well, of course he has a candle. This is a chandler's house. There are candles everywhere. You will never want for light as long as you live here. And he's lying on his side with the candle on the floor between you, talking in the low voice of someone who knows the master's bedroom is 2 floors below, but isn't entirely certain sound doesn't travel. The rules, he says, are mostly about waste. Human waste, animal waste, kitchen waste, the waste from the shop. All of it has rules. What kind of rules? When you can put it out, where you can put it out, what happens if you put it out wrong. You stare at the ceiling. Someone actually made rules about this. The city made rules. The parishes made rules. The guilds made rules about their own rubbish. The Court of Aldermen has been making rules about where people can dump things for about 100 years. A pause. Most people ignore them. Then why do the rules matter? John looks at you with the expression of someone who has survived 6 months in this city and is about to explain something important. Sometimes people get caught, and when they get caught, it's not a fine you can laugh off. It's the pillory, or the stocks, or a fine that takes your master's quarterly earnings, or your master loses his license with the guild. A pause. And then it's your fault. See? You see. Tell me the rules, you say. John tells you the rules. This is the one with the cry, the one they called Gardy-loo. You know what a chamber pot is. You grew up with chamber pots. In your village, emptying the chamber pot meant carrying it to the dung heap in the garden, which was later dug into the vegetable beds, which is a fairly sensible system when you have a garden and a vegetable bed and space between yourself and your neighbours. In London, you have none of those things. You have a room in an attic. Below you is a chandler's shop. Below that is the street. The official rule is simple. You may not empty your chamber pot from an upper window between the hours of 6 in the morning and 10 at night. In theory, waste disposal from windows is a night activity. The streets are darker. Fewer people are walking under your window at 2 in the morning than at 2 in the afternoon. In theory. In practice, the rule is enforced the way most things in this city are enforced, by complaint, occasionally, if a sufficiently important person is inconvenienced. The cry is Gardy-loo, a mangled version of the French Gardy-loo, meaning watch out for the water. Except it's not water. And even if you shout it, the person below has maybe 2 seconds to step to the side. 2 seconds to figure out which window it's coming from and which direction to move. 2 seconds while still carrying their own business, navigating the gutter, possibly leading a horse. 2 seconds is not a lot of time. John tells you about a merchant who was hit last winter on Cheapside. Broadcloth coat, he said, worth more than a week's wages. The merchant had the householder dragged before the parish beadle, but nothing much came of it because nobody could prove the window with any certainty, and 3 separate neighbours swore the merchant had been walking down the middle of the street like a fool, which was almost certainly true. "Does Mr. Farrow do it?" you ask. John is quiet for a moment. Mrs. Farrow does it. 3 in the morning usually. She says the law allows it after 10 at night. Does it? The letter of the law says yes. The spirit of the law? He shrugs. The spirit of the law says you shouldn't be emptying your waste out of windows at all. but the city hasn't worked out what else to do with 500,000 people's waste, so the spirit of the law keeps quiet about it. You lie there thinking about this. Outside, the city makes its nighttime sounds. Somewhere on the street below, there's the sound of footsteps and a man singing badly. Something that might be a ballad or might just be drunkenness in musical form. A dog barks. The night watchman passes, calling the hour 11 o'clock and all's well, in a voice that suggests all is probably not entirely well, but he's going home in an hour and doesn't much care. You think, 500,000 people every night, 500,000 chamber pots, and somewhere a fraction of those pots are being emptied at this exact moment from windows all across this city, with varying levels of warning and varying levels of accuracy, into the streets below. You make a note to yourself. When you walk anywhere in this city, walk in the middle of the street and keep your eyes upward. Actually, no. John told you this afternoon that the gutters run down the centre of most streets, which means walking in the middle means walking through whatever flows there. Walk close to the buildings, but don't walk too close to the buildings, because anything falling from above will fall close to the buildings. So your options are walk in the centre and navigate the gutter, or walk at the edge and risk the window. There's a technical term for this, the London shuffle. A constant sideways adjustment, eyes tracking both the ground and the upper stories, never fully relaxed, always half anticipating the next obstacle. You'll have it mastered by February, John assures you. By February it becomes automatic. You'll stop thinking about it. You'll just do it. At 5:30 in the morning you discover Rule 2. You're downstairs fetching water from the barrel in the backyard before the day's work starts when you hear it outside. A bell. Not a church bell. Lower than that, and closer and more insistent. A handbell being rung by someone walking down the street. "What's that?" you ask John, who is already at the workbench moving rendered tallow into moulds with the practised ease of someone who has done this 1,000 times. "The raker." He doesn't look up. "You've got maybe 5 minutes." "For what?" He does look up now. "To get any waste out front. Kitchen scraps, ash from the hearth, any solid waste from the shop." He goes back to the moulds. "The rakers make their rounds at first light. If your waste isn't out when they pass, it sits on your doorstep until tomorrow. Or you pay someone to take it to the dung heap yourself. Either way, it's your problem." You'd heard of rakers, in theory. The city employs men to collect the waste from each ward's streets, loading it into carts and taking it to the dung heaps on the outskirts, the great heaping mounds of compressed centuries of waste that sit outside the city walls and are, somewhat remarkably, the subject of their own entire economy. The dung sold to farms for manure, the ash sorted for potash, the bones rendered for whatever a bone can be rendered for. In practice, this is the first time you've encountered one. You take the ash bucket from beside the hearth and go outside. The street is barely light. A grey-blue pre-dawn that makes the buildings look like they're made of smoke. The cold hits you immediately. Your breath steams. The raker is maybe 50 feet away, a stocky man with leather-bound hands and an expression that has seen everything. He's pushing a large handcart low-sided, already half full with the morning's collections from further up the street. Behind him, his apprentice, a boy younger than you, maybe 12, drags a broom through the street, pushing loose debris toward the cart's path. The smell coming off the cart is extraordinary. You've spent all of yesterday in a tallow chandler's workroom, and this is still something else. Compressed, varied, organic. the accumulated nighttime output of a city street in October. You put your ash bucket where the raker indicates, at the edge of the step. He moves past without looking at you. The boy with the broom sweeps around your feet. Bucket back inside by noon, the raker says without stopping. I find it left out, I take it. Take it. He's already passed you. You go back inside and ask John why the raker would take your bucket if you leave it out. Because the buckets are worth something, John says. Good wooden bucket, that's 6pence. Some of these rakers have a whole wagon full of collected buckets by the end of a month. Is that allowed? John gives you the look again. The one that means you're going to ask that question about a lot of things in the next few months, and the answer is going to be not technically, but yes in practice. Not technically, he says, but yes in practice. The ash is important. This is something that takes you a while to understand. The ash from the hearth isn't just waste, it's a commodity. Good wood ash, properly collected, is used in soap making, in the tanning of leather, in the clarifying of metals. This city's ash is sorted and sifted at the dung heaps by women who get paid by the bushel for decent potash ash versus general waste. The problem is that in a city of 500,000 people burning coal primarily, not wood, the ash is increasingly carbon heavy and less useful for these purposes. The soap makers and tanners are complaining. The dung heap sorters are complaining. The prices for good ash are going up. And because prices are going up, there are people who will collect ash from doorsteps before the rakers get to it. Not steal it exactly, or maybe steal it exactly. The line between informal collection and outright theft is a line that shifts depending on who's asking the question. What this means in practice is that on Eastcheap, on mornings when the ash is particularly good, a full week's burning, a pile of decent wood ash mixed in. You sometimes see men moving very quickly before the raker's bell, collecting from doorsteps, loading into sacks, vanishing before anyone with authority comes by. It means that the raker sometimes finds nothing at a doorstep and bangs on the door to complain that the householder hasn't put out their waste. And the householder says they did. Honestly, they did. And the raker says nothing walks off on its own in this city, does it? And the householder says no, sir, it doesn't, except when it does, which is every week. A whole ecology of waste, of collection and recollection, of unofficial sorting and semi-legal trade. You are one small piece of it. Every morning you will take the ash bucket out. Every morning you will wait for the raker's bell. Every morning you will do this tiny, essential, invisible act that helps the city process itself for the rest of the year. For years after that, probably. And you'll never think much about it after the first month. That's how it works. Here is something they did not teach you in your village. Beneath many London houses there is a pit. Not a hole in the ground, not exactly. A carefully constructed pit lined with brick or stone, sealed at the sides, accessed through a small opening in the floor of the cellar or the yard, designed to collect the household's waste, the stuff that doesn't go out the window, the stuff from the privy in the yard, the overflow from years of occupation. This pit is called a cesspit. The stuff in it is called, well, it's called various things, most of them unpleasant, and it is, over years, supposed to drain slowly into the surrounding soil, percolate down into the earth, where it will decompose and be gone, in theory. In practice, in a city this dense, the soil is already saturated. The cesspits fill up, they overflow, and when they overflow somewhere, and in the compact housing of 1660s London, somewhere often means into the neighbour's cellar, or into the street, or into the well. the well that the neighbourhood drinks from. You discover this gradually. First, you discover it intellectually, when John tells you about the night soil men. The night soil men are exactly what they sound like. Men who come in the night, officially between 10 at night and 5 in the morning. Another rule, another specific hour window, because of course there's a rule, and empty the cesspits. They work in teams of 3. One man goes down into the pit with a bucket and a long-handled ladle. One man stands at the top, hauling up the filled buckets on a rope. One man runs the filled buckets to the cart waiting in the street. The man at the bottom. That's the job. Think about that job for a moment. They're called gong farmers in the country. In London, they're night soil men, which is a slightly more dignified name for a genuinely extraordinary task. The regulations say the pits must be emptied when they reach a certain level. There are supposed to be inspections. Ward officers are supposed to walk the streets and check that cesspits aren't overflowing into the public way. In theory. In practice, the pits are emptied when the householder can't stand it anymore, or when the overflow starts becoming someone else's problem in a visible way, or when a plague scare makes everyone suddenly interested in where all the waste is going. 1663 is 3 years after a significant outbreak, 2 years before the Great Plague that will kill 100,000 people in London in a single terrible year. You don't know that's coming, of course. Nobody does. But people are still nervous. The city still holds the memory of 1660 in its body, like a scar that hasn't finished healing. So the cesspits are being emptied with unusual frequency this year. An unusual number of night soil men at work. An unusual amount of the stuff being carted out of the city to the same dung heaps where the ash goes, to be eventually processed and sold as fertilizer, because nothing in this city is ever entirely wasted. You discover this less intellectually and more directly one Tuesday in November. You're on your way back from a delivery. Tallow candles to a chandler's supplier near the waterfront. A round trip of maybe 2 miles done in just over an hour, and you're taking the short route back through a court off Billingsgate, a narrow alleyway between 2 rows of houses when you smell it. Not the general smell of the city, the specific smell, the enhanced, concentrated, close-up smell of a cesspit being opened. You stop. At the end of the court, maybe 30 feet ahead, a night soil man is working. He's got a partner with a handcart, and he's just opened a hatch in the yard of one of the houses, and the smell coming out of that hatch is something you have never experienced and will never forget. It's like all the worst things about city smell compressed into a single source. The hydrogen sulfide, you don't know it's called that, of course, because this is 1663 and chemistry doesn't have that name yet, but you know the egg rot sulfur smell, and the methane, which smells less specific but is heavier and more dizzying, and the general biological overflow of decomposition, of things that were once organic and alive and are now neither. The night soil man's partner sees you standing there and makes a gesture. Go around. You go around. But even around the back, through the connecting alley, even 2 streets away, the smell follows you for several minutes, carried on the damp October air, clinging to your coat. You'll be back at the shop before it fades. Night soil men, you tell John when you get back. Billingsgate Court, probably, he says. That pit's been a problem since summer. Couple of families complained to the beadle. What happens to it? The stuff they take away? Dung heaps, the farmers buy it. Good fertilizer, they say. You think about this. So the vegetables we eat. Don't think about that, John says. Seriously, don't think about that. Here is something you will walk past every day. Eastcheap has butchers, always has had butchers. The street and its surrounding courts and alleys have been doing animal slaughter in one form or another for so long that the stones themselves seem to carry a faint memory of it, a redness in the grain of certain cobbles that might be rust and might be something else. The animals come in on hoof, cattle mostly, but also sheep, pigs, sometimes deer, walk through the city streets in herds, navigating between pedestrians and carts, depositing evidence of their journey as they go, because nobody has yet invented a way to make livestock use a designated path. The slaughter happens in the yards behind the shops, in the early morning, usually before the customers come, and here is the sanitation problem stated plainly. A butchered animal produces a remarkable quantity of waste. The blood alone. From a single cow, the blood is measured in gallons, 3, 4, 5 gallons depending on the animal, and this blood has to go somewhere, and in a medieval street that someone decided to call a market and keep doing business in for 500 years, somewhere has historically meant the gutter. There is a rule against this. There are actually several rules against this. The city has been producing rules about slaughterhouse waste since at least the 1300s. There are orders from various Lord Mayors, increasingly specific, increasingly frustrated in their wording, telling the butchers that they may not discharge blood and offal into the public streets. They must dispose of it properly. They must pay a cartman to remove it. They must not run it into the gutter where it mingles with the rainwater and the other waste and flows down to the Thames in a stream that is, and this is an actual complaint from an actual civic document, loathsome to the sight and deadly to the smell. The butchers ignore this rule with the confidence of a trade that has been ignoring it since before most of the rule makers' grandfathers were born. Not entirely, not flagrantly, not in the way that someone with a bucket of night soil might flagrantly throw it into the street at noon just because they felt like it. The butcher's not stupid. They know the rules exist. They make gestures toward compliance. But a slaughtered cow produces 5 gallons of blood, and the gutter is right there, and the cost of a cartman to remove it properly is, well, it's a real cost. It adds up. Multiply it by the number of animals slaughtered daily on this street, and you've got a significant additional expense on a business operating on fairly thin margins already. So the gutter runs red in the morning on Eastcheap. Not every morning. Not consistently. But often enough that you notice, and often enough that on certain mornings the smell from the butcher's alley adds a new top note to the city's already complex olfactory composition. Something hot and iron-rich and somehow both raw and already decaying. You're carrying a delivery of candles past the alley entrance one morning, about 2 weeks into your time here, when you see the inspectors. 2 men. One of them has a leather-bound notebook. Both of them have the look of men who are doing a job they were asked to do but don't particularly relish, which is the look of most people who deal with enforcement in this city. They're talking to the head butcher, a large man named Thatcher, who you've been introduced to because Mr. Farrow buys fat trimmings from him twice a week. You can't hear the conversation, but you can read the body language. The inspectors gesturing at the gutter, Thatcher gesturing at basically everything, in the manner of a man explaining that circumstances are complicated and the rules are unreasonable. And anyway, look how much blood was actually involved here. Exactly compared to what it would have been in a truly negligent scenario, which this is not. The notebook comes out. Something is written in it. You keep walking. That afternoon, you ask Mr. Farrow about it. He's at his ledger doing accounts with the careful concentration of a man who cannot afford arithmetic errors. He doesn't look up. Inspectors. Thatcher was being fined, I think. Probably. A pause. He turns a page. He'll pay it and go back to running the blood in the gutter next week. They all do. The fine is cheaper than the proper disposal. He does look up now. That's why the same names appear in the court records year after year. It's just a cost of doing business, a nuisance tax. Is that... You're not sure how to finish the sentence. Is that right? Is that just? Is that how things are supposed to work? That's London, he says, which is an answer to all three questions simultaneously. There's a thing you need to understand about the Thames. The Thames is London's water supply, and the Thames is London's sewer, at the same time, simultaneously, concurrently, both, at once, without anyone seeming to think there's a contradiction here worth addressing. You understand this in stages. The first stage is the water carriers. Water does not come to your house through pipes. This is a thing that exists. There are some wooden pipe systems in parts of the city, New River Company pipes running from Hertfordshire. Some of the wealthier neighbourhoods have service. But for most of the city, for most of the people, water is carried. Water carriers are men and women and children with yokes and buckets. Walking from the conduits and wells to the houses, a constant flow of water throughout the day, supplying the basic necessity of a city that cannot exist without it. The conduits take water from the Thames, cleaner than the Thames, filtered somewhat, routed through pipes and settling tanks, but ultimately the Thames, and the Thames coming through the city receives everything the city produces. The drainage gutters flow into streams that flow into the Thames. The cesspits that overflow into the ground eventually find their way to groundwater that connects to the Thames. The slaughterhouse blood runs down to the Thames. The tanning yards effluent, and the tanning yards use urine, vast quantities of collected human urine, as a primary tanning agent, which is another thing to think about, goes to the Thames. The dye works, the soap works, the fish markets. Every market and every trade and every house in this city of 500,000 people has some connection, however indirect, however long, to the river. The river is the colour of weak tea at its best and something you don't want to name at its worst. The smell coming off it at low tide, when the mud flats are exposed and everything that has settled there over centuries is in direct contact with the air, is the thing that all Londoners reference when they're trying to explain the city to someone who hasn't been here. You know the smell of the Thames at low tide, a Londoner will say, and another Londoner will make a face and nod, and that's the end of the explanation. And yet, the water carriers are at the conduit every morning, filling their buckets, walking them to households across the city. People are drinking this water, cooking with this water, washing in this water. The connection between the water supply and the waste disposal is not invisible. People know on some level that they're drawing from the same source they're discharging into. The recurring plagues, the ones that come every decade or so, the ones that have been coming for hundreds of years. People have theories about them. Miasmas, bad air rising from the cesspits and the river. The connection isn't quite understood in a modern scientific sense. The germ theory of disease being still 200 years in the future, but the association is there. The smell, the waste, the sickness. The connection is felt, even if it's not precisely articulated. And yet the system persists, because what else are you going to do? Build a new river? Move the city? So you drink the water and you dump the waste, and you say prayers against the plague, and you hope for a good summer and try not to think too carefully about what might be in the drinking bucket. You fill your cup at the household barrel and you drink it, and it tastes of nothing much, slightly mineral, slightly of the oak barrel itself, and you're fine. Today you're fine. Most days you're fine. The city has been doing this for centuries and most people survive it, most of the time, and that's the deal you're making. The alternative is thirst, so you drink. This is a list. You may not officially, according to various orders and proclamations issued by the Lord Mayor and the Court of Aldermen over the preceding century, slaughter animals in the public street, stack dung in front of your premises for more than 3 days, throw or pour any wastewater, night soil or ordure from an upper window between 6 in the morning and 10 at night. Allow your privy to overflow into a neighbour's cellar or yard. Keep pigs within the city walls without specific permission. Allow your gutter to become so blocked that it overflows onto the road. Leave the carcass of a dead animal in the street for more than 24 hours. Discharge the waste of your trade, the blood of butchers, the lye of soap makers, the lime of builders, the ash of smiths, directly into the public way. These are all real rules, written down, official. And here is the practical reality of every single one of them. People do all of these things, constantly, daily. As a matter of simple, practical necessity, in a city that has grown far faster than its infrastructure, in a city where the rules were written for a population of 200,000 and are now being applied inadequately to a population of 500,000. The pigs are the ones that get you the first time. You're sent on an errand into the shambles, which is the great butcher's quarter slightly north and west of where you work, and you turn a corner into one of the side courts, and there they are. 5 pigs, loose in the street, rootling through a pile of what appears to be the contents of someone's ash heap and kitchen scraps combined. They're just there, not attached to anyone. No obvious owner nearby. Just 5 large, pale, mud-caked, snorting pigs in a London street in October. One of them looks at you. You look at it. It goes back to the pile. Don't they have rules about pigs? You ask an old woman who's watching them from her doorstep with the air of someone who finds this neither surprising nor interesting. Oh, yes, she says, lots of rules about pigs. And, she shrugs, they get rounded up sometimes. Someone pays a fine. The pigs come back. A pause. The pigs know the streets better than most people, lived here longer. The pigs of London are, in a strange way, part of the sanitation system. They eat garbage. They patrol the streets looking for organic material and consume it, which is less romantic than sanitation suggests, but more practical than most of the official alternatives. Some years the city has actually relied on them, the plague years especially, when the dung carts couldn't keep up, when the dead outnumbered the living in some parishes. The pigs were there, making their rounds, doing their part. You give them a wide berth and complete your errand and come back a different way, through a cleaner street. But you think about those pigs for the rest of the day, their specific calm, the way they move through the city with the confidence of things that had decided the city belonged to them. They're not wrong exactly. This city belongs to everyone who's figured out how to survive in it. John takes you to see something on a Saturday afternoon in late October, when Mr. Farrow has given you both a few hours on account of completing the week's candle quota ahead of schedule. He takes you to a well, not the water carrier's conduit, not the big public wells near Cheapside. A smaller well, in the courtyard of a tenement off Aldgate. maybe 10 minutes walk from the shop. The kind of well that a court of maybe 30 families shares. The kind of well that provides maybe half of those families' daily water. Look, John says, pointing not at the well itself but at the wall of the yard, where a dark stain runs from about knee-height to the ground. What is that? Cesspit overflow, he says it matter-of-factly. The pit in the cellar of the house there. He points to the building closest to the stain. It's been overflowing for 2 months, seeps out through the wall down into the yard, and the well is about 12 feet from the wall. A pause. 12 feet isn't very far in terms of what goes through soil. You look at the well, at the stain, at the 12 feet of the yard between them. Does anyone know? The people who draw from the well know, or they know something's wrong. 2 of the families upstairs have been sick all autumn. He looks at you. They don't connect it exactly. They think it's the cold. They think it's bad air. They don't think about what's in the water they drink every day. A long pause. Why are we here, you ask? John reaches into his coat and brings out a folded piece of paper. There's a man, Samuel Thorpe, he calls himself, works for the parish. He's been collecting information about wells like this, writing it down, trying to petition the vestry to do something. He unfolds the paper. It's a hand-drawn map of the neighbourhood, with wells marked and cesspits marked, and a series of careful annotations. He gave this to me to take to the beadle, as evidence. Did you take it? John folds the paper back up and puts it in his coat. I'm going to. What will the beadle do? A long silence. Long enough that you already know the answer. Long enough that John doesn't have to say it, though he says it anyway. He'll note it. He'll write a letter to the householder. The householder will say he's aware of the problem and intends to address it. The matter will be adjourned. The cesspit will keep overflowing. The well will keep being drunk from. He pauses. Maybe in 6 months there'll be another letter. You stand there in the cold courtyard looking at the stained wall and the well and the 12 feet of contaminated distance between them. Then why bother taking it to the beadle at all? John puts the paper more firmly in his pocket. Because Thorpe believes in documenting things. He says that if you write enough of this down, if you collect enough of it in one place, eventually someone will read it and understand that there's a pattern. That it's not just this well, it's 100 wells. That it's not just this cesspit, it's 10,000 cesspits. He starts walking toward the gate. He says eventually someone will work out what's actually making people sick, and it'll change everything. Change how the city's built. Change how the waste is handled. Change the rules. You follow him. Does he actually believe that? He's a man who spends his free time mapping cesspits for fun, John says. He believes in quite a lot of things most people wouldn't bother with. You come out of the courtyard and into the street, where a water carrier is making his way past with a full yoke, heading in the direction of the tenement you just left. You think about the 12 feet, about the soil between the stain and the well, about what moves through saturated London ground on its way from one place to another. You watch the water carrier's bucket swing. You don't say anything. You don't know this. It's winter of 1663 and the plague is still 18 months away, and the knowledge that it will kill 100,000 people in a single year, that it will come roaring through these streets and empty half the houses and leave the city changed forever, that knowledge is not yours to have. But the city already carries the fear of it in its body. The way an old injury carries a memory of pain, responding to weather, responding to cold, responding to certain kinds of pressure. People in London in 1663 know about the plague the way you know about a recurring nightmare. It has always come back. It came back in 1625, killing 35,000. It came back again in 1636, and again in 1647, and again in 1660. The pattern is established. Everyone is waiting. What they don't know, what the best medical minds of the era don't know, because germ theory is 2 centuries away, is that the plague bacteria lives in the fleas that live on the rats. And the rats are everywhere in the city. And the rats are everywhere in the city in large part because the city's waste management creates ideal habitat for them. The dung heaps, the overflow from cesspits, the blocked gutters full of organic material, the slaughterhouse waste, the fish market waste, the kitchen scraps piling up in courts and alleys before the rakers arrive. All of this feeds the rats. The rats are well fed and numerous. The fleas are well fed and numerous. When the infected fleas jump to humans, nobody knows to connect it to the cesspits or the blocked gutters or the rats nesting in the walls. They know about the bad air, the miasma theory, the idea that disease rises from decomposing waste as a kind of poisonous vapour. They're not entirely wrong in a rough and metaphorical sense. The decomposing waste is the problem, just not quite in the way they think. The rules about waste, the rules about cesspits and slaughterhouses and the gutter and the Thames, these rules exist because people know at some level that the cleaner the city is, the less the plague comes. They've seen enough outbreaks to have the rough correlation, even without understanding the mechanism. But knowing the correlation and having the resources and infrastructure to actually change the situation are 2 very different things. So the rules exist, and the rules are ignored, and the cesspits overflow, and the rats thrive. And in the winter of 1664, the first cases will appear, and by the summer of 1665, you will be one of the people who has to decide whether to stay or to leave, and what you own that's worth more than your life, and whether Mr. Farrow will understand if you simply don't come back. But that's not yet. Right now, it's October 1663, and you're learning the rules. While we're on the subject of things that London is breathing, let's talk about the coal. London switched to coal from wood in the course of the 1600s. Not entirely, not immediately. Wood was still burned in countryside and in some wealthier houses, but the broad mass of the city, the tenements and the shops and the workshops and the cooking fires, had moved to sea coal, as they called it, brought down by ship from the Newcastle coalfields to the north. Sea coal is cheaper than wood in a city that has cut down most of the surrounding forests. Sea coal is more compact, more calorific, easier to store. Sea coal makes more smoke. The smoke from sea coal is different from wood smoke. It's denser. It carries more sulfur compounds. It leaves black deposits on walls and windowsills and the insides of your nose and your lungs. In winter, when the fires burn all day in tens of thousands of hearths simultaneously, the smoke sits over the city like a layer of bad weather, a permanent fog and smoke combination that reduces visibility and turns the buildings progressively blacker. John Evelyn, a man of letters and a founding member of the Royal Society, who will write a pamphlet about this exact problem in 1661, 2 years before your arrival, calls the smoke of London this horrid smoke which obscures our churches and makes our palaces look old. He petitions King Charles II about it. He has proposals. Move the industries that burn the most coal, breweries, dye houses, soap works, to the downwind edge of the city, where the prevailing westerly winds will carry their smoke away from the inhabited centre. His pamphlet is called Fumifugium, which is Latin for flight of smoke, and it is a serious, well-argued document written by a serious, well-connected man, and absolutely nothing is done about it. Because moving the breweries and the soap works would disrupt established trades and established interests and established profits. And the smoke, after all, is invisible in the way that all chronic problems are invisible. It's just there. Always. Background. Normal. The air is just the air. Why would you notice the air? You notice it when you come back from errands in the outer parts of the city, toward the edges where the houses thin out, and there are still occasional trees, and the sky above is occasionally actually blue, rather than the dirty white grey of the London atmosphere. You notice the difference in your lungs, a looseness, an ease of breathing. Then you come back in and your body closes up again, gradually adjusting to the baseline. The official rules about coal smoke are like the official rules about everything else in this city. Real, written down, occasionally enforced in spectacular cases, routinely ignored in all the routine cases that add up to the actual problem. There's a rule that burning coal in certain industrial quantities requires permission. There's a rule about the height of certain chimneys to disperse the smoke upward rather than laterally. There are rules about what the dye houses may burn and when. What there isn't is anyone with both the authority and the will to actually change the system. The coal keeps burning, the smoke keeps sitting, the buildings keep going black. And you, Thomas Aldgate of Eastcheap, breathe it every day and don't know that this is not, in fact, how air is supposed to feel in your lungs. By the end of November, the cold has settled in properly. Cold London is different from warm London in ways that are mostly improvements. The smell, for one. Cold suppresses the most acute layers of the city's smell. The biological decay, the river mud, the slaughterhouse heat, the way cold suppresses everything. The streets are frozen hard, which means the gutter channels are mostly solid rather than liquid, which means your boots stay clean for longer. The cold smoke is still present, but the cold air has a crispness to it that partially cuts through. The downside is everything else. The cold that comes in through the uninsulated walls of the attic room and settles on you like a second blanket, but a very bad blanket made of something that hates you. The cold hands on the brass fittings of the shop, the cold air coming in whenever the door opens, the cold water in the washing basin that in December has a skin of ice on it by morning. John shows you the trick with the brazier. A small iron pan of lit coals that you hold between your hands to warm them before beginning the day's work. The warmth lasts maybe 5 minutes before your hands go numb again, but those 5 minutes are worth it. Your hands have to work. The candle moulds require precision. Tallow at the wrong temperature won't set right, and tallow that's been fumbled with cold hands leaves fingerprints. And Mr. Farrow has standards. The cold also brings the frost fairs sometimes. Not this year. This year the Thames doesn't quite freeze over. But the watermen talk about the winters when it has, when the river turns solid enough to walk on, and the whole city pours out onto the ice, roasting oxen over braziers, dancing, printing commemorative booklets, actual printing presses, set up on the ice, stamping out souvenir cards that say, printed on the Thames, in the name of whatever frost fair year this is. You hear about this and file it away as something you'll see someday, an experience you haven't had yet, a thing to hold in reserve, a future promise from the city to you. For now, winter in London is cold hands and frozen gutters and coal smoke and the daily negotiation of a body that didn't quite evolve for this particular combination of cold and damp and urban density. You survive it. That's the main thing. You survive the cold and the smell and the rules and the daily discovery of new ways the city is trying to kill you, or at least make you deeply uncomfortable. And somewhere in the surviving, something shifts. It doesn't happen at once. It's not a moment you can point to. But sometime in December, maybe the Tuesday before Christmas, when you've been in London for exactly 10 weeks, you're walking back from a delivery to a house near Cornhill, and you're taking a route you haven't taken before, through a passage between two buildings that John told you about, a shortcut that saves 5 minutes and avoids the worst stretch of Gracechurch Street on market days, and you come out of the passage into a small court you've never seen before, maybe 20 feet across, 3 or 4 houses on each side, all slightly leaning, a bare tree in the centre, its roots breaking through the cobblestones. A woman hanging laundry from an upper window, the clothes already going stiff in the December air. A cat sitting on a step watching the laundry with professional assessment. And the light is coming through a gap in the buildings in a particular way, catching the frost on the cobblestones, making the court look like something in a painting, not a flattering painting, a real one. One that shows the frost and the laundry and the leaning houses and the cat. You stand there for a moment, not in the way you stood still in your first 30 seconds in London, frozen by the shock of the city. This is different. This is choice. This is you, deliberately standing still, looking at something. You know where you are. You know which direction Eastcheap is. You know how long it will take to get back and whether you're on time. You know this city in the way you know your own bedroom in the dark. Not completely. There are whole parishes you haven't visited, whole streets you haven't found yet, but enough. The bones of it, the rhythm of it. The smell is the same as always. The cold is the same as always, but you're standing in it differently. You're standing in it like someone who belongs here. December 25th, 1663. The rules get suspended officially and unofficially. Not the cesspit rules. Not the Thames pollution. Those don't take holidays. But the enforcement does. The inspectors take Christmas. The beadle takes Christmas. The parish officers take Christmas. The rakers still come on the morning of the 26th. They always come, they don't stop for much. But the 25th itself has a looseness to it, a suspension of the usual pressures. Mr. Farrow closes the shop. This is not surprising. Sunday rules apply, more or less, and besides, nobody buys candles on Christmas except in emergencies, and emergencies don't care what day it is. Mrs. Farrow makes a goose. You are included in this meal, which is not guaranteed. Apprentices are not always included in household meals. Some masters are specific about where the line falls between employee and family. But here it happens, the 4 of you in the back room, Mr. Farrow and Mrs. Farrow, and you and John, with the goose and some boiled turnips and a loaf of bread and a small beer each. Mr. Farrow says grace. It's brief. He's not a demonstrative man. Then you eat. The goose is good. The fat under the skin has been properly rendered, which Mr. Farrow did himself, you suspect, because a man who renders tallow professionally will be constitutionally unable to leave a goose unrendered without feeling he's wasted something. And the meat pulls easily from the bone. You sit there eating a goose in a chandler's back room in London, and you think about your mother's Christmas, which involved more people and more noise, and a fire big enough to warm a much larger room. You feel the shape of what you're not homesick for exactly. Not homesick, but home-aware. conscious of the difference between there and here. "You're settling in," Mrs. Farrow says. She says this the way someone states a fact about the weather. "John said you found a new route through Cornhill." "Yes, ma'am." "Good shortcuts are valuable." She takes a piece of bread. "Learn the streets, all of them. The ones that seem useless, the ones that dead end. Even those matter because knowing where a dead end is saves you from walking into one at night when someone's following you." You glance at Mr. Farrow to see if he'll add to this. He's looking at his plate with the concentration of a man thinking about something else. "Someone was following you, you ask?" "This is London," she says. "Someone is always following everyone in one sense or another. The trick is knowing when it matters." Mr. Farrow does look up then, at his wife. A brief look with a slight upward movement at one corner of his mouth that might, in a more expressive face, have been a smile. "She grew up here," he says. "To you." 40 years in this city. 42, she says. "She knows things I don't know yet." "You know some things," she says, which is, you suspect, high praise in the language of their marriage. You eat your goose and listen to this quiet exchange between two people who've been living and working in the same building for 20 years, who know each other's rhythms the way you're slowly learning the city's rhythms, who move around each other without friction. You think, this is what survival looks like. Not dramatic, not triumphant, just continuous. Just showing up every day and doing the thing, and going to bed, and getting up, and doing it again. There's a moment in January that you'll remember for a long time. You're at the water conduit filling the household bucket. The water carrier who usually handles this is sick, something respiratory, which is extremely common in January in London, and you're covering the task. And there's a line. There's always a line at the conduit. 6 or 7 people with their buckets, waiting for the pipe's flow. The man ahead of you is a night soil man. You can tell partly by the smell, which is distinctive, and partly by the specific worn texture of his clothes, which are waterproofed in a particular way with the specific thick grease that night soil men use to protect against. Their work. He has a bucket like yours. He's waiting his turn at the conduit like everyone else. Nobody in the line is talking to him. Nobody's standing particularly close. But nobody has told him to leave or move to a different line. He's just there, a man doing his job, one of the most essential and least recognised jobs in the city's survival, waiting for water with everyone else. When he gets to the front of the line, he fills his bucket quickly, efficiently, with the practiced movement of someone who carries water as part of their daily routine in both directions, taking it away from people's houses and taking it back to his own. He picks up his bucket and walks off without looking at anyone. The woman behind him in line moves forward to take his place, and gives no indication that anything notable just occurred. But you stand there for a moment, holding your own empty bucket, thinking about what just happened, about who that man is in this city's economy, what he knows that nobody else does, where he goes at night, what he handles. Without him and the men like him, the city would drown in itself, within weeks probably. The cesspits would overflow, the courts would flood, the wells would contaminate, the plague would come faster. He is doing more to prevent the plague than any physician in the city, and he filled his bucket and walked away, and nobody said thank you. You fill your bucket and walk home. Let me skip forward for a moment, because the winter you can endure, but the summer you need to be prepared for. By June, the smell of the Thames has changed category. You've been here through the cold months when the river was manageable. You've learned to hold your breath at low tide, to take the longer route rather than the riverside path when the mud flats are exposed and the sun is on them. You've adjusted, you've calibrated. June undoes all of that calibration. The summer heat does things to the river that winter simply doesn't. The decomposition that proceeds slowly in cold water accelerates dramatically in warm water. The same biological processes that produce the baseline Thames smell become, in June, something significantly more urgent. The city produces no less waste in summer than in winter. More, if anything, as the population crowds in and the markets run longer, and the industries that make the most smells run at full pace. But in winter, the cold suppresses. In summer, the heat amplifies. On the worst days, the hot still days in July when the wind doesn't come from the west and the Thames sits there under a bleached sky, the smell comes through the walls of the shop on Eastcheap, through closed windows, through cloth hung over doorways, through the body's automatic adjustment toward breathing through the mouth. Mr. Farrow dips a cloth in vinegar and ties it around his face when he has to go to the riverside of the city. Vinegar was a traditional protection against miasma, against the bad air theory of disease. This is not effective against germ theory, but it helps somewhat with the smell. You copy him. The cloth over the face like a half mask, the vinegar smell sharp in your nostrils, marginally preferable to what it's replacing. How long does this last, you ask, your voice slightly muffled by the cloth? Until September, John says. He's not wearing the cloth. He has, he explains, given up on pretending it helps. Maybe October if we're unlucky. Every year I've been here. You think about the Thames running through this city, receiving everything summer after summer. Generations of this, centuries. The Romans were here, on the banks of this same river, building their roads and their walls and their city. Their waste went into this river too. Their cesspits and their slaughterhouses and their kitchens. 2,000 years of accumulated waste. And the city is still here, and the people are still drinking from it, and the river is still there. That fact, that the city has survived despite all of this, has survived and grown and become the largest city in the world, that 500,000 people are managing to live on the banks of an open sewer, and not all dying immediately, is actually extraordinary if you stop to think about it. The human body is more resilient than the worst conditions it's been given to survive. Most of the time. Not all of the time. Not if you're unlucky with which well your court draws from. Not if the cesspit in the tenement next door had been overflowing since spring, and the water in the earth between that pit and your well is exactly the kind of contaminated that bodies can't compensate for. But most of the time, you're still here. Every Thursday the bills of mortality are published. They've been published weekly since the last great plague of the 1560s. Lists of the dead, organised by parish, organised by cause of death. A running count of how the city is doing week by week. Most weeks the numbers are routine. 100 deaths, maybe 150. The normal attrition of a large city, fevers and accidents and the consequences of drink and old age, and the particular vulnerabilities of infants and children who die in this city at rates that would be catastrophic to contemplate in modern terms. You pick up the bills at the stationer's near St. Paul's on your way back from errands sometimes. You've started to read them. Not because you're morbid exactly, though working with a tallow chandler has given you a certain practical relationship with mortality that you didn't have in the countryside, but because the bills tell you something about the city that nothing else does. They tell you where the dangerous parishes are, the ones with the crowded tenements and the overflowing cesspits and the contaminated wells, the ones where infant mortality runs highest, the ones where the summer death toll spikes. You can feel the city's health in those columns of numbers, the way a doctor feels a pulse, except the doctor is you and the patient is London. In early autumn of 1664, the bills start showing something different. Not dramatically, not yet. Just a slight uptick in certain parishes. A cause of death listed as spotted fever, or tokens in some cases, which are the terms people use when they're nervous about saying the word, appearing in the columns with slightly more frequency than last year. You notice it. You're not sure if you should mention it. The bills look different, you say to Mr. Farrow one Thursday. He's already read them. Of course he has. He reads the bills every week. He has for 20 years. He looks at you over them. You read the bills? When I can. A pause. He sets them down on the counter. What did you notice? The spotted fever numbers in Aldgate Parish and St. Giles in the Fields. A very long pause. Mr. Farrow looks at the window. Outside, Eastcheap is doing its ordinary business, the sounds of carts and vendors and the smell of the butcher's alley carrying through the glass. Keep doing your work, he says finally. Keep reading the bills, and if you see those numbers double in a single week, come and tell me immediately. What happens then? He looks at you with the expression of someone who's been in London for 20 years and knows exactly what happens then. Then we have decisions to make, he says. He picks up the bills again and goes into the back room. But before all of that, before the decisions, before the summer of 1665 and what it will bring, there is still spring. There is still a particular afternoon in April when John persuades you to come down to the river for the afternoon, not to cross it, just to stand on London Bridge and look at it. You've crossed the bridge dozens of times by now. You know it's chaos. The buildings leaning toward each other overhead, the shops that crowd every inch of available space, the gap in the middle where the houses were demolished after the last fire and the rebuilding still hasn't been completed, leaving a hole in the bridge's centre that gives you a sudden, vertiginous view straight down to the racing water below. The water races because the bridge's piers are too close together, 19 arches, but the stone piers between them take up most of the river's width, forcing the water to squeeze and accelerate through the gaps. At certain tides, the water drops 3 feet from one side of the bridge to the other. The current through the arches can reach 8 or 9 miles an hour. The watermen call it shooting the bridge. You don't shoot the bridge in a small boat if you have any sense. You unload your passengers on one side, the boat goes through empty, or with an experienced crew only, and you reload on the other side. People die in those arches. Not often. Often enough. But from above, from the gap in the middle where the buildings are missing and the bridge is just an open wooden railing above open sky, the view is extraordinary. The Thames below you, grey-green in the April light, wide, moving with the weight of tides and rainfall and the slow, inexorable physics of water finding the sea. Upstream to the west, the spires of the city. St. Paul's, visible above everything, though its old spire was lost to a lightning strike decades ago, and the replacement dome hasn't been built yet. That's still 30 years in the future. But the mass of it, the cathedral's bulk, rises above the surrounding rooftops. Downstream to the east, the ships. The forest of masts that means London is connected to the world. vessels from the Baltic and the Mediterranean, and increasingly from places further than that. The trade routes opening, the empire expanding, the wealth flowing up the Thames in the form of cargo holds. You stand there for a while, holding the railing, the wind off the river cold and salt-edged and carrying the smell of the sea. John is watching the boats. He has a particular interest in the smaller wherries, the nimble passenger boats, because he's been saving toward his own boat. 3 years from now, if the saving goes well. He talks about it the way people talk about things that are possible, and maybe real and close enough to see from where you're standing. Below you, 60 feet down, the water is the colour of brown silk in the afternoon light. Everything that the city has sent it in the past week, which is everything, is in that water. And the water doesn't care. The water just flows, west to east, tide in, tide out. The city's output riding the current to the sea takes it, disperses it. Eventually, that's the city's faith. The sea will take it. The rain will dilute it. The earth will absorb it. The next generation will deal with whatever the current generation leaves behind. You look at the water a long time. You think about the night soil men, the rakers with their bells, the inspectors writing in their notebooks, John Evelyn writing his pamphlet that nobody acted on, Samuel Thorpe mapping the contaminated wells that nobody fixed. And you think about the bills of mortality, the weekly count, the parishes where the numbers are already slightly beginning to change. The city should be cleaner, you say. John keeps watching the boats. Yes. People keep writing rules about it, keep trying to fix it. Yes. And it doesn't get fixed. A long pause. The river moves below you. A wherry shoots through one of the arches downstream, its passengers ducking instinctively though there's nothing to hit, the low ceiling of the arch already passed. It'll get fixed eventually, John says. It has to. The city keeps growing. At some point it grows past what the current system can handle, and then either the system changes or the city dies. When? He shrugs. Not us. Not our generation, probably. After the plague comes, whenever it comes, people will think about it differently. He turns away from the railing. Come on, I'm hungry. You take one more look. The grey-green water, the ships, the spires. The greatest city in the world, running on chaos and resilience and rules that nobody follows, and waste management that barely works, and the stubborn refusal of 500,000 people to die despite every practical invitation to do so. You come away from the railing, you'll be back tomorrow, same streets, same rules, same smell. But tomorrow is tomorrow. It's a July evening, warm, the long summer light still holding at 8 o'clock when you're supposed to be in bed. You're sitting on the step of the shop. Mr. Farrow is at a guild meeting. Mrs. Farrow is visiting her sister. John is out, with the door open behind you and the street doing its evening slowdown in front of you. 10 months since you arrived. Since the gutter took your boot and the city presented its credentials, you know things now. You know the hour the raker's bell sounds and how long you have before he passes. You know which gutter runs fastest in rain and which puddles are deceptive, the ones that look shallow and aren't. You know the water carrier who can be trusted and the one who fills his buckets at the wrong conduit and doesn't say so. You know the smell of a cesspit that's been opened recently versus one that's been festering for months. You know the smell of the Thames at various tides and various temperatures and what each combination means for the day's air quality. You know the specific difference between coal smoke from a domestic hearth and coal smoke from a dye house. And you know which direction the wind needs to be blowing for the dye house smoke to reach Eastcheap. You know what the bills of mortality look like when they're fine, and you know what they look like when they're not. You know the parishes to watch. You know where the vulnerable wells are. You know, without quite knowing how you know, that the numbers you're seeing in the bills right now, early July 1664, are not quite right. You know that you'll be making a decision soon, a real decision, whether to stay, if it comes to that, whether to go back to Kent, or go north, or go somewhere else entirely, whether your 3 shillings and 4pence commitment to this city is worth more than your life. You don't know what you'll decide. You know you'll decide something. The evening light catches the upper stories of the buildings opposite. Gold on old stone. A window box with straggly herbs trying to grow despite the coal smoke. A cat on a windowsill. A different cat from the one in the December court. Or possibly the same cat ranging this way on his rounds. The city smells the way it always smells. Exactly the way it always smells. You breathe it in. Here is the thing about the rules of 1663. London that you understand now, that you didn't understand when John first told you about them in the attic room in October. The rules are not wrong. The rules are not stupid. The rules exist because whoever wrote them looked at what the city was doing and understood, correctly, that it was a problem, that you cannot have 500,000 people generating waste at this volume and density without some system for managing it, that the system which worked for a city of 200,000 people does not work for a city of 500,000. The rules are fine. The problem is everything else. The problem is that the rules require infrastructure that doesn't exist. Pipes that haven't been built. Sewers that won't be built until the 1860s, 200 years from now, when the great stink of 1858 finally becomes so catastrophic that Parliament, whose own building sits on the bank of the Thames, inhaling what the Thames produces, Parliament finally funds a complete new sewage system for London. The problem is that the rules require enforcement that requires manpower, that requires money that the city doesn't want to spend, because spending money on waste management means taxing the trades that produce the waste. And the trades have guilds, and the guilds have lawyers, and the lawyers have arguments that go in circles. The problem is that the rules are written by people who know what should happen and implemented in a city where half the population is too poor and too busy surviving to care about the fine for running blood in the gutter, because the fine is smaller than the profit margin and the inspector only comes twice a year. The rules are right, the city is wrong, and the city will keep being wrong for 200 years more, until the smell becomes literally intolerable even to the powerful. You can't fix this. You're 17. You're an apprentice chandler. You can note it. You can understand it. You can carry the water carefully and take your bucket out at the right time and read the bills of mortality and keep your well water separate from your wastewater as best you can. You can try not to be the person who ignores the rules when it matters. That's not nothing. Most of the city's survival comes from individuals doing the small right thing, in the absence of systemic support. You're one of those individuals now. It's getting late. The evening light is fading off the buildings. The street is quieting into its night version. The vendors packing up, the footsteps thinning, the sounds shifting from commerce to everything else. Somewhere up the street the night watchman is just starting his rounds. You'll hear his call in a few minutes, 10 o'clock and all's well, and you should be upstairs by then. You stand up from the step. Your back aches slightly from the bending work of today's candle making. Your hands smell of tallow. They always smell of tallow now, Mr. Farrow was right. You stopped noticing after the first month, and the skin of your knuckles is cracked from the cold water washing. You go inside, lock the door. The shop is dark except for 2 candles on the counter. Obviously this is a chandler's shop. There are always candles. This will never be a place where you worry about light. The candles throw their specific warm pool around themselves and leave the rest of the room in a darkness that's comfortable and known. You blow out 1 candle, carry the other to the stair, up through the house. The kitchen on the 1st floor, still warm from the supper fire. The 2nd floor, the master bedroom with the door closed. The 3rd floor, the small sitting room Mrs. Farrow uses. Then the stairs to the attic. Narrow, steep, the wood creaking in the 3rd step from the top, which you've learned to skip. The attic room. John is still out. The room is yours for a few hours. You set the candle on the small shelf. Sit on the edge of the straw mattress. Your boots are dirty. Eastcheap in July is the combination of packed earth and spilled market waste and animal deposits that you now navigate without thinking, and you pull them off and set them by the door. The sounds of the city come up through the floorboards and the thin walls. Distant voices. A cart somewhere, late for its round. The sound of the Thames, which in summer you can sometimes hear even this far from the river, a kind of ambient murmur that might be the water or might just be the city's own blood flowing. Morning comes the way it always comes, not gently, not with any consideration for whether you've had enough sleep or whether your body is ready. The church bells don't ask. 6 o'clock is 6 o'clock, whether you went to bed at 10, or whether John came home at 2 and woke you getting into the mattress, and you lay in the dark for another hour listening to him snore. 6 o'clock. The bells. You're up before the 3rd toll because by now your body has absorbed the rhythm so completely that the bells are almost unnecessary. Some part of you wakes before them, listens for them, uses them to confirm what it already knows. The washing basin, the cracked skin on your knuckles, the cold water that in January has the ice skin on it and in July is merely cold, a mercy. Your face is awake before your mind is, downstairs, the hearth. The first work of the day is the fire, and the first work of the fire is the coal. And the coal smells the way coal always smells, that dense mineral bite that you now associate entirely and completely with mornings. By the time Mr. Farrow appears from the back of the house, the fire is going and the first batch of tallow is on the heat, and the candle moulds are laid out on the bench in the order of the day's production. He looks at the moulds, looks at the fire, nods, that nod. That single economical nod that means you've done what needed doing, which is all I ever expected, which is everything. You've been chasing that nod for 10 months and you still feel it when it comes. October turns to November, turns to December. The frost comes properly in December. Not the teasing cold of autumn, the cold that pretends it might relent, might give you 1 more mild week before it commits. December's cold is committed. It settles in over the city like a judgment and stays. The Thames doesn't freeze this year. You keep checking. You've been told about the frost fairs, that particular spectacular London madness that happens when the river turns solid, and you want to see it, but the river stays liquid. Dark and moving and cold, but liquid. The gutters do freeze. The channels of waste and water and everything else that runs down the centre of the streets turns to a brown-grey ice that makes the morning trip to the conduit a careful one. You learn to test each step, to carry the bucket low so that if you slip you don't lose the whole thing. John falls once in December. He goes down on the Gracechurch Street ice in front of a baker and a butcher's boy and a woman with a basket of leeks. and the bucket goes sideways, and he goes sideways, and the cold water goes everywhere. The baker laughs. The butcher's boy laughs. The woman with the leek says something sharp and moves around him. John sits on the ice for a moment with the specific expression of a person, deciding whether this is humiliating or just London. He decides it's just London. Gets up. Retrieves the bucket. You don't laugh until you're half a street away, which is the decent minimum. January. January is grey. Not grey the way a cloudy day is grey. Grey the way a long illness is grey. A flattening of everything. A reduction of the world to a narrow band of endurance. The days are short. The sky is white grey from the coal smoke sitting above the city. The streets are mud under frost, frost under mud, alternating with the weather. The shop is quieter in January. This is a pattern you've learned. The shop has rhythms, commercial seasons that don't exactly match the calendar seasons but overlap with them. Spring brings weddings and the refurbishment of houses and new orders. Summer brings the theatre season and the wealthy households running their full complement of entertaining. Autumn brings the settling of accounts and the preparation for winter. January brings the people who forgot to order candles before Christmas and are now paying more for them because you have leverage. Mr. Farrow does not quite gouge them, but he does not negotiate particularly hard on January prices. Supply and demand, he explains when you ask about this. They need light. We have light. They chose not to prepare. Preparation is a service worth paying for. Is that fair? He looks at you with the expression he has when you ask questions that aren't wrong but aren't quite the point. The price is visible before they agree to it. Nobody is deceived. That's the whole of fairness in commerce. You think about this for several days, the limits of fairness, where it begins and where it ends, whether a city that lets its cesspits overflow into the wells of the poor is a city that believes in fairness, and if not, what it believes in instead. You don't reach a conclusion. You keep measuring tallow. In February you receive a letter, the rector's handwriting on the outside, which means it was written in your mother's words and transcribed by someone who could actually do the writing. Your mother's literacy is of the functional village variety, sufficient for basic accounts and not much more. You read it in the attic room by candlelight. Your youngest brother has had a fever, recovered. The harvest last year was adequate, not good. Your father's knee is worse in cold weather. Your mother hopes you're eating properly and not becoming one of those London people who are too clever by half and forget who they came from. The letter takes 6 sentences. It carries, in those 6 sentences, more information about home than you would have thought could fit in them. You fold it and put it under the straw mattress, where you have 2 previous letters from home, a small archive, 3 letters in 10 months, which is about the rate of correspondence available to people of your background and level. You think about what you would write back if you could write back yourself, which you can't. Your own literacy is functional but not letter-writing quality, and you haven't yet found anyone in London whose services as a scribe you could afford for personal correspondence. You think, I am alive. I am employed. I can navigate this city in the dark, and I know the rules about cesspits, and I have seen things that have no equivalent in any village in Kent, and I don't know yet what I am becoming, but I am becoming something. You think, I am not becoming too clever by half. You hope. March comes with rain. April comes with more rain, then briefly with light, then more rain. Then 1 week in the middle of the month when the sky's blue and the streets are drying out and something happens to the air that is almost like breathing. You go back to the court with the bare tree. It has leaves now, small and new and very green, the particular shocking green that early spring produces, as if the colour is making up for lost time. The cat is back on the step. Possibly the same cat. You've decided it's probably the same cat. You stand in the court for a moment on your way back from an errand, looking at the tree with its new leaves, and you feel something that takes a moment to identify, because it's not something you've felt much in the past winter. Something like hope. Not dramatic. Not the hope of transformation or miracle. The quiet hope of continuation. Of, the winter was survived, the spring is here, what comes next might be all right. The cat watches you. You nod at the cat, which is a thing you apparently do now. You keep walking. May 1664. The bills of mortality have been saying something for 6 weeks. Not loudly, not in the way that announces itself. The numbers are up in a few parishes, out east, toward Aldgate, toward St Giles in the Fields. The specific cause of death listed in those parishes is spotted fever, and other formulations that mean something when you know what to look for. You've been reading the bills every Thursday since February. You started because it was interesting. You've continued because you can't stop. The way you can't stop watching a crack in a wall to see if it's getting wider. It's getting wider. Not everywhere. Most of the city is fine. The normal death toll, the ordinary misery of fevers and accidents and old age, and the ongoing slaughter of infants by diseases whose names haven't been properly categorised yet. But in those eastern parishes, in those specific streets with the specific tenements and the specific wells that John walked you past in October, Aldgate bills are up again, you say to Mr. Farrow on a Thursday in May. He's reading the same document across the counter from you. His face gives nothing. I see that. Is it? I don't know, he says. The most honest thing he's said about this. Not yet. It was up last spring too. It came down, could come down again. But if it doesn't, he folds the bills, puts them in his coat. If it doesn't, we'll see it in the summer numbers. July, August, that's when it shows itself. He looks at you. Keep working. Keep reading. Tell me if you see something I might miss. The implicit thing in that sentence, something I might miss, hangs in the air between you. The implicit thing is, you're reading these more carefully than I am right now, because you're younger, and you have more to lose, and I know that, and I'm asking you to use that. You go back to work. On a Saturday in June, you go back to the Aldgate court, the one with the contaminated well and the stained wall. You have no particular reason to go. No errand takes you there. You go on your own time during the 2 hours on Saturday afternoon that Mr. Farrow reliably gives you since the good negotiation with the Hounds Ditch supplier in January. The court looks the same as it did in October. Possibly slightly worse. The stain on the wall is larger, or maybe just more visible without the winter frost masking the edges. The well is still there, the rope and the bucket on the windlass. A woman is drawing water. You stand at the entrance to the court and watch her wind the bucket up and pour the contents into her own pail. Her hands are practised and quick. She's done this 1,000 times. She picks up her full pail and turns and sees you watching. What do you want? Nothing, you say. I'm sorry to stare. She looks at you with the particular assessment that London women develop. The rapid survey of whether you're someone who means trouble or someone who doesn't matter. And apparently you fall into the second category because she relaxes slightly. You look like you've got something to say, she says. You hesitate. You do have something to say. You've been thinking about whether to say it for 6 months. Since the day John brought you here in October. Since the bills started climbing in the eastern parishes. Since Mr. Farrow said to tell him if you saw something he might miss. The well, you say. Do you know about the cesspit in that building? You point to the stained wall. She looks at it, looks back at you. That's been there all winter. It's seeping into the ground, the pit's overflowing, the well might be what? A long pause. Contaminated, you say. It's not the word people use. The word people use is unwholesome or bad or just the water's off this week. But it's the clearest word you have. She looks at her pail, then back at you. Is there another well? You think about the streets between here and the nearest alternative conduit. St. Botolph's, maybe, 10 minutes north. She holds her pail and looks at it, looks at the stained wall. I can't walk 10 minutes to water every time I need water, she says. I've got 3 children. You know this is true. You know there's nothing you can say to this that doesn't sound like someone who doesn't have to carry water 10 minutes away to keep their children alive. You know the whole problem of the city is contained in this exchange, in the 12 feet between the stained wall and the well, in the distance between what should be and what is. I know, you say. I'm sorry. She looks at you for a moment, not unkindly. You go tell your parish beadle about the wall, she says. Write it down if you can. Keep writing it down until someone does something. A pause. That's what the men who can read are for. She picks up her pail and goes inside. You stand in the empty court for a moment. Then you go to find John and borrow his paper and his pen. The bills in July are not good. You read them 3 times. Then you go downstairs and find Mr. Farrow and put them on the counter in front of him. He reads them once, puts them down. The numbers have doubled in Aldgate in 3 weeks. Yes. And St. Giles. Yes. He's quiet for a moment. The shop is empty. It's Thursday afternoon, business slow, the heat of the day keeping people inside. The street outside is quieter than it should be for this hour. My wife's sister is in Aldgate, he says. I know. Another pause. I'll write to her this afternoon. Tell her to visit us. Stay here for a while. He looks at the bills without touching them. Maybe a long while. What about the shop? The shop is here. The shop doesn't go anywhere. He stands, picks up the bills, folds them with the same careful precision he brings to everything. You should write to your family in Kent. Tell them the summer in London is unhealthy this year. Tell them not to come to the city until autumn at the earliest. My mother doesn't travel to London. Good. He's already moving toward the back room, toward his writing desk, toward the letter he needs to write. At the door, he stops without turning round. You should think about where you would go, if the numbers keep going as they're going. Think about it now, while there's time to think clearly. You stand alone in the shop, the street outside, Eastcheap in July, the sounds of a city that doesn't know yet, or knows but hasn't admitted, or has admitted and is carrying on anyway, because what else do? You carry on. You open the shop and you sell the candles and you read the bills on Thursday and you write the letter to your family and you keep your bucket away from the cesspit runoff as best you can. You carry on until you can't, and then you decide. Here is what 10 months in London has taught you about the relationship between rules and survival. The rules matter. The rules about waste disposal and the hour of the chamber pot and the raker's collection, and the distance between a cesspit and a well. These rules matter because the difference between a city that takes them seriously and a city that doesn't is, eventually, 100,000 dead in a single year. Eventually, not today. Not this Thursday. Not this specific moment standing in the shop on Eastcheap with the bills folded in Mr. Farrow's hand and the street going about its ordinary business. But the rules are the city talking to itself, saying, we know this is bad, we know this is wrong, we know the current arrangement is killing people, and has always been killing people, and will keep killing people, and we're trying to say so formally, even when the formal saying doesn't change the informal doing. The rules are someone caring, even when caring doesn't fix it, even when the beadle writes a letter and nothing happens, and the cesspit keeps overflowing, and the water keeps contaminating, and the rats keep eating in the alleys, and the fleas keep riding the rats, and the summer keeps arriving with its specific weight of heat and contagion. Someone cared enough to write the rule, to write the bills, to map the wells, to write the pamphlet that nobody acted on, to tell a woman drawing water from a contaminated well that there's a cleaner well 10 minutes north. Someone always cared. That matters. Not enough. Never quite enough, never fast enough, never funded enough, never enforced enough. But not nothing. You carry the ash bucket out at the right time. You read the bills. You write it down. Late July. The bills are very bad now. The word nobody was using 3 months ago is being used now. Not in polite conversation, not in shops or church or the Guildhall, but in the streets, in doorways, in the low voices of people who are trying to decide what to do with the information their eyes are giving them. The word is plague. You've had this conversation with John 3 nights ago, late. Both of you awake in the attic in the dark. My brother's in Suffolk, John said. He's written asking me to come. Are you going? A pause. Are you? I don't know yet. Mr. Farrow hasn't said anything. He's written to his wife's sister. She's coming to stay. He's not sending us away. No. A longer pause. Outside, the city was quieter than usual, even for midnight. Not dramatically quiet. It's never truly quiet, but a particular quality of quiet that had been building for days, the sound of a city modulating itself unconsciously in response to something it doesn't want to name. I think, John said carefully, that if the bills next week are what the bills last week looked like they were heading toward, I'm going to my brother's. In Suffolk, south of the river, different parish, different wells. He turned over on the mattress. You should think about Kent. Kent is far. Kent is alive. You lay there thinking about this, about the 12 feet between the stained wall and the well, about the bills, about Mr. Farrow's calm, careful face when he reads them, about the 3 shillings and 4pence you arrived with and what they've become, about the nod, about Mrs. Farrow telling you that customers don't buy the candle, they buy the light, and the light is what you make them feel, about the night soil men and their buckets in the dark, about the water carrier at the contaminated conduit, about all of it, about whether any of it matters if you're dead. You didn't reach a conclusion that night. You haven't reached one yet. It's August 3rd, 1664, a Tuesday, warm. You go to the bridge in the morning before the shop opens because you want to see the river. Early. The city is still assembling itself, the traders setting up, the water carriers starting their rounds, the rakers already done and gone, the streets emptying of night and filling with day. The specific hour when London is between its two selves. The bridge is not crowded at this hour. A few traders crossing early, a waterman below, a woman with a basket moving fast toward the Suffolk side. The bridge buildings are mostly shuttered still. Through the gap in the middle, where the houses are gone, The river is silver in the early light. You stand there for a moment. Downstream, the ships, their masts catching the morning light. The great apparatus of trade and empire already stirring, already beginning the day's movement of goods from one place to another. Cotton from the Americas, spices from the Indies, wool going out, everything coming in, the city's arteries, upstream, the city, the rooftops and the spires and the dome that hasn't been built yet, the dome that will take 30 more years to arrive, that will come after the fire that hasn't happened yet, the fire that's coming in 2 years, September 1666, that will burn most of what you can see from this bridge to the ground and then be rebuilt into something extraordinary. But none of that is yours to know yet. What's yours to know is the city as it is right now, today, before the fire, before the worst of the plague, in the specific moment of its particular, imperfect, complicated glory. The smell of the Thames at low tide in early morning is, well, you know what it is. You've known for almost a year. But there is also underneath it the salt, the sea edge, the reminder that this river goes somewhere, that the current you're watching move under the bridge is heading, by a route of several days, to the open ocean, to the world beyond the city. The same water that receives London's everything also connects London to everything. That's the city, isn't it? That's always been the city. The mess and the connection, inseparable. The waste and the world, the same river. When you get back to the shop, Mr. Farrow is already there. He's standing at the counter, not working, just standing. The bills of mortality are open in front of him. This week's bills. He doesn't look up when you come in. The Aldgate numbers, he says. I know. A pause. Sit down, Thomas. You sit on the stool by the counter. Mr. Farrow is still looking at the bills. My wife and I spoke last night. He's choosing his words with the care he brings to gild documents. We're staying. The shop is here. Our life is here. I am 60 years old and I have survived 2 outbreaks in this city, and I will take my chances with the God who has kept me here. He pauses. That is my decision, and my wife's. It is not your decision. You wait. You came here with a letter of introduction and a bundle of clothes and 3 shillings. You have been here 10 months. In those 10 months you have learned a trade sufficiently well that I would trust you with this counter alone for a half day without losing me money. You have done good work. Another pause. I'm not your family. This is not your home. Not yet. Not in the way it would need. To be for me to ask you to stay through this. I'm not afraid, you say, which is partially true. Being unafraid of the wrong things, Mr. Farrow says, is not a virtue. It is inexperience. For the first time, he looks up from the bills. Go to Kent. Write to your mother tonight. Get on a wagon within the week. When this is over, and it will be over, they always end. Come back. Will the shop still be here? A long pause. I intend it to be. The way he says intend carries the full weight of its conditional meaning. He intends it. He does not promise it. He cannot promise it. Come back, he says. Whatever you find when you come back, come back. You look at the bills on the counter between you. You look at the shop, the candles hanging from the ceiling frames, the bench with the moulds, the bolts of wick, the window with its distorting glass, the street outside doing its ordinary morning things, 10 months of this room, of its smell and its light and the specific weight of a full bolt of tallow. I'll come back, you say. Mr. Farrow nods, that nod. different from the daily nod of adequate work. Larger, heavier with things not being said. He picks up the bills, folds them, puts them in his coat pocket. I have accounts to do, he says. Be useful for what's left of the morning. He goes into the back room. You sit on the stool for a moment in the empty shop. Outside, Eastcheap does its thing. Cartwheels, voices, the smell of the butcher's alley, which you've stopped consciously noticing but which is still there, which has always been there, which will be there long after you and the shop and possibly the whole street has changed beyond recognition. You get off the stool, go to the bench, pick up a mould, get to work. 5 more days. You memorise things. You've been doing this without knowing it, but now you do it deliberately. The view from the attic window, the specific angle of rooftop and chimney, and the sliver of sky between the 2 buildings that face east, where in clear mornings you've seen the light come up for 10 months. The sound of the raker's bell, the specific pitch and rhythm of it, the weight of a full bucket from the conduit. John leaves on Wednesday. His brother sends a cart. The 2 of you shake hands in the street and he gives you the name of the inn where you can send a letter if you want to. The shop will still be here, John says. Mr. Farrow said the same thing. He means it. John picks up his bundle. He survived 60. He's a stubborn bastard. He grins. Come back. The cart takes him south across the bridge, and you stand in the street watching it go. The way you watched London arrive in on the day you came here, except now you're the one staying still. On Thursday you read the bills one more time. On Friday Mrs. Farrow gives you a loaf of bread and a small wrapped piece of cheese for the road, and shakes your hand with the formality of someone who has decided that sentiment is better expressed through food than tears. The shop will be here, she says. You'll keep saying that. We keep saying it because we need to believe it. She releases your hand. Go. On Saturday morning, before dawn, you carry your bundle, the same bundle, more or less, that you arrived with, plus some additional clothes and the 3 letters from home and a stub of a candle from the workshop because it seemed right, down the stairs and through the shop. Mr. Farrow's already up. He's at the counter, ledger open, doing accounts. Saturday accounts. Normal thing. He looks up. The wagon to Dartford leaves at 7, he says, from Gracechurch Street. I know. You have enough money of the fare. I counted last night. He looks at you for a moment. Then he opens the strong box under the counter, the one under the floorboards, the serious one, and takes something out. Puts it on the counter between you, a silver shilling. For the road, he says, in case. You look at it. Mr. Farrow, take it. I'm not sentimental about money. It's a shilling. He closes the strong box. Come back in the spring, the summer at latest. You pick up the shilling. In the spring, you say. He goes back to his ledger. You go to the door, open it, step out onto Eastcheap. October 1663 to August 1664. 10 months and 3 days. A whole city's worth of living. The street is quiet at this hour. The dawn light coming grey and flat between the buildings. The smell already building. Coal smoke from first. Fires. The river 2 streets south. The butcher's alley doing its early work. The smell of London, which you will carry with you in some form for the rest of your life, embedded in the walls of your lungs. The specific atmospheric signature of this particular city in this particular century. You walk north to Gracechurch Street. You find the wagon. You get on. The road out of London. Familiar now from the other direction. You know this road. You've seen it from the back of a carter's wagon. coming the other way 10 months ago. The city falls behind you, the buildings thinning, the air changing, the specific compressed urban smell loosening, spreading, becoming something else. Somewhere outside the city, the smell of actual earth reaches you. Soil and growing things and the animal and vegetation smell of countryside that you grew up with and stopped noticing, and now notice intensely, because you've been missing it for 10 months without quite knowing you were missing it. Your lungs do something, a loosening, an opening, the involuntary response of a body that has been breathing coal smoke for 10 months, suddenly encountering air without it. You breathe in, hold it, breathe out. The wagon moves through the October morning. Wait, it's August. August, still summer. The fields brown at the edges but not yet harvest ready. The air warm, the sky pale with heat haze. You're going home, and you're already calculating when you'll come back. Spring, Mr. Farrow said. Spring at the latest. The plague will run through the winter. It always does. The cold will suppress it. The city will get through it. Most of it will get through it. And in the spring, the survivors will look at what's left and start rebuilding, the way they always do. And you'll be one of those who comes back. Not because you're not afraid. You're afraid. You've read the bills for 6 months and you know exactly what those numbers mean, and fear is the appropriate response. But afraid and staying away are not the same thing. The city will be there in the spring, changed, diminished in some ways, but there. Mr. Farrow at his ledger, the raker with his bell, the night soil men at their work, the water carriers at the conduit, the bills published every Thursday with their columns of the dead and, eventually, please God, the columns going back down to baseline. The city survives. It has survived this before, and it will survive it again, and it will go on being the impossible, ridiculous, magnificent, filthy, glorious, rule-ignoring, waste-generating, plague-drawing, never quite clean enough city that it is, until someone eventually builds the sewers and cleans the Thames and connects cause to effect, and finally fixes the things that the rules were always pointing at without quite reaching. That will take 200 more years. But it will happen. And in those 200 years, the city will get bigger and worse, and then better, and then different. And the rules will multiply and be ignored, and eventually, slowly, unevenly, expensively, be followed. Thomas Aldgate of Eastcheap won't see most of that, but he'll come back in the spring, and he'll count it. The wagon stops at an inn in Dartford for the night, a room shared with 3 other travellers, all of them leaving London for their own reasons, some of which they volunteer and some of which they don't. You don't volunteer yours? Nobody presses. The room smells different from London. The absence of coal smoke is still startling even now. The night sounds are different. Animals, wind, the specific silence of countryside that is not actually silence, but is the absence of city, which is not the same thing but feels like it. You lie on the inn's bed, straw mattress, thin, not as familiar as yours in the attic, but straw is straw, and look at the ceiling. The ceiling is low and wooden and unstained. No decades of cooking smoke. The grain is plain and unpretentious. You think about Mr. Farrow at his ledger, Mrs. Farrow with her Sunday clothes and her precise practical advice, the Aldgate well, the night soil men, the raker's bell, the bills. You think about John somewhere in Southwark with his brother, the cat in the court with the bare tree, which by now has its leaves back, bright green in early spring. Wait, it's August, it's full summer. The leaves are full and dusty. The tree in the court is at its fullest and slightly yellow at the edges the way London trees always get. By August, the coal smoke getting into them. You think about the bridge and the view from the bridge and the smell of the river at low tide in July, which is a smell you will never fully rid yourself of, which is now part of what you know London to be the way you know the shape of your own hands. You close your eyes. The inn is quiet. The road outside is quiet. Somewhere in the distance, so far away that it's more imagination than sound, the bells of a church mark the hour. Not London bells. Different bells. Smaller, lighter, without the centuries of accumulated resonance that London bells carry, but bells nonetheless. The hour comes and goes, the night continues, and you let it. The day has been long, and the wagon was cold in the morning and warm in the afternoon, and the road was rough in the ways that all roads are rough, and your body has been carrying you through all of it with its specific tired competence. Let the competence rest. Let the body rest. Let the mind rest last, because the mind is the hardest thing to quiet. The mind wants to keep reading the bills, keep calculating distances, keep measuring cesspit runoff against well depth. But the mind can rest too. You've done what you could today, carried the bucket out at the right time, read what needed reading, written what needed writing, made the decision when the decision needed making. That's enough. That's always enough. The city doesn't ask for more than that. The city asks you to show up, to know the rules, to care that the rules exist even when they're broken, to write it down when the wall is staining and the well is at risk, to not be the person who empties the pot at noon without calling the warning. Small things, ordinary things, the 10,000 small ordinary things that are the whole of how a city actually functions, as opposed to how it looks in the engravings. You showed up. You read the bills. You're coming back in the spring. That's the deal. That's always been the deal. Let sleep come the way it came in the attic, in layers, the sounds first. They've been here all along. The inn's night sounds, the other travellers breathing in the dark, the livestock somewhere below in the inn's yard. Let those sounds become a background. Let them become the texture of the dark rather than information the mind needs to process. The body next. The ache across your shoulders from the wagon bench. The tiredness in your legs. The specific soreness in the heel of your right foot where your boot rubs when you walk for more than a mile. You should get that looked at. It's been bothering you since April. You've been meaning to fix the boot for 2 months. Let that go. It will still need fixing in the morning. The morning can have it. The smell. The clean countryside smell that your lungs are still slightly confused by, still checking, still waiting for the coal smoke that isn't there. Let your lungs relax into the absence. Let them accept clean air as normal, the way they accepted coal smoke as normal, the way your body adapts to whatever it's given, because adaptation is what bodies do. The mind last. The bills, the numbers, the stained wall and the 12 feet, the night soil men and their terrible essential work, the raker's bell at 5:30 in a grey October dawn, all of it real, all of it important, all of it here, in you, absorbed into the fabric of who you are after 10 months of breathing this city's air and learning its rules and surviving its winters. You're carrying it with you back to Kent. You'll bring it back to London in the spring. But right now, right this minute, the road has used you up and the night is dark and the air is clean and the bed is adequate and there is nothing the city needs from you tonight. Tonight it's just this, the dark, the quiet breathing, the distant bells fading, The boundary between awake and asleep dissolving the way it does when your body decides to stop asking permission. Let it come. You're warm enough, fed enough, safe enough. You have a trade you're learning and a city you'll return to and a master who called you not a bad lad and a shilling in your pocket from someone who said come back. You'll come back. Let the night have the rest. Let the weeks and months ahead, the winter in Kent, the watching and waiting, the spring calculation, the return, let all of that be what it will be. Tonight is tonight. The road behind you and the road ahead of you and the dark countryside around you and the inn. Ceiling above you. Centuries from now, someone will lay sewers under these streets. Will connect cause and effect. Will finally build the infrastructure that all the rules were always pointing toward. Will clean the river that received a city's everything for 2,000 years and somehow, against all practical expectations, kept flowing. They'll name things after the people who fought for it. They'll write the history of how London finally got clean. And somewhere in that history, in the footnotes, in the bills of mortality for October 1663 to August 1664, there will be a record of this city as it was, as you knew it. The rules and the rakers and the night soil men and the stained walls and the wells. The city talking to itself, saying, we know this is wrong. We know the current arrangement is killing people. Saying, we're trying. That's not nothing. That's enough. The dark, the quiet. Good night.